Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And tonight, welcome, everybody, we're going to do it again. We have an incredible show for you. Cutting edge conversation. But before we get started, as always, I just want to thank you for being here with us. Thank you for the lively chat in the chat room. Thank you for the messages that you send us. And you can email us at broadcastteamalpha.com. Broadcastteamalpha@gmail.com. You can also email us at the website. There's a contact form. But I'd like to invite you to our mastermind sessions on Sunday. Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, we get together with some of the most expansive thinkers that I have ever really met in my whole life. And together, for benevolent reasons, we use our mind power to help people, to change bad weather situations, to have peace during the elections in the United States, and all other kinds of really amazing things like that. So if that at all appeals to you, you can send us an email to the Mastermind Connection, have peace, all one during word, the election, gmail.com. But don't forget THE before Mastermind Connection. Augie, will you tell us about our amazing guest tonight?
Yes, absolutely. And we were a little pressed for time here, so I have to apologize because
tonight
I didn't get the exact pronunciation of his name, so I'm going to give it a shot. And we have Manu Seyfzadeh. And like us foreigners, we often get our name butchered, and I hope I didn't get too far away. So anyway. Now, you're going to really enjoy this because everybody out there listening right now, I think they have a soft spot in their heart for Egypt, for the pyramids, for the Sphinx, the ancient history of that time and how people lived and the mysteries that goes along with it. And that is what we will talk about tonight. We have a phenomenal guest. His name is, like I said, Manu Seyfzadeh, and he is an Egyptologist. He's written several books on it and do a lot of hands-on investigations. And for those of you out there that like to go to his website and look at that at the same time you listen, his website is cheopspyramid.com. cheopspyramid.com. And his latest book, it's Under the Sphinx. And yes, we're going to talk about what's under the Sphinx. And I went to Amazon and to look up, that book, and I saw something incredible. Now, I'm an author and I have, I'm on Amazon. And I saw something here that I have never seen before. I don't have 100% 5 stars on anything on Amazon, but that book, Under the Sphinx, that you wrote, Manu, has 100% 5 stars on Amazon. That is incredible. I've never seen that before. So that's, I'm actually starting to endorse the book here before we even have done the show, but this is incredible. I've never seen it before. So, also, he is an import to the United States, like I am. He was born and raised in Europe. He came as about 20 years old. He came to the United States to go to medical school. He became an MD, a doctor, and a PhD, and now he is working in the field of medicine. And that is quite an accomplishment also, doing that at the same time as being an Egyptologist. So let's dive into the mystery of the ancient past a little bit. So welcome to the show, Manu.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here with us. This is so exciting. And even if some of us don't have a current love for Egypt, Many of us have an ancient love, some of the mythology and Isis and, fanning life back into Osiris. And I'm so excited to hear about this. How did you get started in becoming an Egyptologist?
Well, I have to clarify, I'm not a credentialed Egyptologist. I'm a hobby Egyptologist, so I do this for fun.
Amazing.
And as you correctly said, I'm a physician, I'm a dermatologist, so I do practice, I have a regular 9 to 5 job. And when I'm in my off time is when I go to ancient Egypt in spirit, and I've been there several times. How I got into this is I always have had a research streak, and so I, always interested in investigating things. That's kind of in my nature, and that comes along with, going to PhD training. You just, you look for a phenomenon and then you study it to see what it means. And there's some, sometimes you stumble on something that nobody else has seen before, and that's what happens in science, right? When you see something that nobody else has seen before, it's an exciting experience. And so I think this is what this is what I brought into the history of Egypt and ancient history and all those kind of things. And so how I got into it, I think it's Robert Bauval's book, the Orion Mystery. That is really what catalyzed it. I can tell you, if there was one discrete moment in my time, I think I was reading that book. I remember when I finished this book, I was just flabbergasted that the heavens had something to do with the architecture on the ground. And but that didn't immediately launch my own studies. I was just amazed that there was this correlation. And then a few years later, and this is now 2016, I stumbled over something. It had to do with the architecture of the Great Pyramid, and I recognized some numbers, and I thought to myself, this reminds me of something that I've seen in astronomy before, and that is how I got started. So this is when I wrote my first book. It has to do with the architectural design behind the Great Pyramid. And so that came out in 2016. And then in 2017, I met Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval in Croatia on a cruise. And that's when it really got started. And I started publishing papers. So I published a paper with Schoch, Robert Bauval. This is about the Sphinx, about the original statue that we say was a lioness. And we even had a name for that lioness statue. And then, a few other papers came. And then the most recent publication is the book that you mentioned, Under the Sphinx, that came out just a few months ago. And that has to do with the Hall of Records, what Edgar Cayce popularized. But what I describe in the book is the real archive under the Sphinx. So this is not a legendary myth that comes from the 20th century. This is a real space with a real archive in it that the ancient Egyptians told us about. So this is not a modern writer or a modern, in this case, a psychic who was telling his clients about this. These are hieroglyphic writings that come from the ancient Egyptians, and that's what Under the Sphinx is all about.
Wow, amazing.
That's phenomenal. And, the rumors about what's under the Sphinx has been around for a long time, but
Yes.
now it seems like you're bringing out the actual writings on explaining more about them. And I'm all ears. Could you dive into this one?
Yeah. So I think Edgar Cayce is the common starting point when you talk about the Hall of Records, and I think that's deservedly so because in those days Egypt was in the news. The pyramid text had just been published. Many texts had just been translated because people had learned how to translate hieroglyphic within a few decades prior, and the Sphinx was being repaired in the 1920s. So Egypt was big in the news in those days, and there's American archaeologists, German archaeologists, they were all looking around Giza. And so anyway, so this idea that there's something under the Sphinx that's when this was cooking, that hope everybody was talking about this. But the physical evidence for a space under the Sphinx actually comes from the work of Thomas Dubecki and Robert Schoch in the early 90s. I think it was 1991. When they did seismic tomography experiments on the grounds around the Sphinx, and they found a void that they called Anomaly A. There had been previously a team from Waseda University from Japan. They were there about 3-4 years earlier, and they also found something that looked like a void to them. Now, I have to tell you, there have been teams in the 70s and later and before that have looked for voids under the Sphinx, and they have drilled, and never anything officially was found. So this anomaly A that Göbekli and Schoch found was the first physical evidence for a real void. And this particular void has never been probed with a drill. There have been drills nearby, but never actually in that field, in that zone in front of the left forepaw, where Göbekli and Schoch found a void. Okay, so this is the first time we actually had some physical evidence. But the problem is that we never knew anything that was inside. We never, because supposedly Edgar Cayce said that it was sealed and it would be unsealed sometime, you know, when the humanity is ready to unseal this archive. But what I found is actually something that was probably in this archive. And that is how Under the Sphinx begins. So my investigation begins with a painting that is one of a kind. There's only one coffin onto which it was painted. And that painting, as I show in the book, shows the heliocentric solar system that the ancient Egyptians for sure did not know at that time, okay? So this is esoteric. We call this esoteric, or you can call it anachronistic information. It's information that doesn't fit into this time period, okay? So where does it come from, right? So that's the immediate question. And so my answer to that is it came from a previous cycle of civilization, and they left it with the ancient Egyptians, and they found it sometime around 5,000 years ago. They did not know what they were looking at, so they had to reinterpret what they saw in terms of things that they understood. And in Under the Sphinx, my proposal is that they reinterpreted this painting, the heliocentric solar system, within the terms of precession that they knew from all the way Nabta Playa. I don't know if you know about this, but in Southwest Egypt, there's a prehistoric site that's called Nabta Playa, and you know, maybe you've heard of Robert Bauval's book Black Genesis, where he describes the discovery of this calendar circle. He describes the complex structures, the megalithic lines that were tracking the stars, and he did this work, by the way, with Thomas. What's his name? Thomas Brophy. He's an archaeoastronomer. He's actually close by where I live. And I've had conversations with Thomas about this work. And so Brophy and Bauval, they published this book, and they wrote about how astronomy, how precession was being tracked in this prehistoric site. So what I think happened is that this prehistoric knowledge about the sky, how the sky gradually moves with time, that knowledge was used to interpret the painting that was found under the Sphinx in an archive in those terms, okay? And that's a really fascinating story. It's kind of like when we find something that we can't explain, what we automatically do is we explain it in ways that we understand, okay? And that sometimes means that information gets changed, right? And so we read it in a different way than it was originally intended. And I think that's exactly what happened here. And so in the book, I explain the details of that, the investigation. And so, yes, what I think happened is that archive was breached about 5,000 years ago. The content was removed. It was taken to a library, first probably around Memphis, and then later it ends up in Middle Egypt near the city of Thoth, the moon god. And that is where this information begins to leak out in the local cemetery, where the elites were in those days being buried with coffins that had text inscribed into the coffins, kind of like the pyramid texts 500 years earlier, right? In those, you know, when the kings and queens had their pyramids built after the 5th dynasty, they had pyramid texts carved into the walls that would help the king and the queen to ascend into the sky in the afterlife. And in the Middle Kingdom, those texts were written, they were called the coffin texts, into the walls of the coffins. And there's one coffin where this painting appears, and this is from a cemetery that is nearby the city of Thoth, where this library is, where that painting ended up. Okay, so that's the connection. So in the book, I trace this painting back in reverse now, back to Giza and under the Sphinx, under the forepaw of the Sphinx, where we know there's a void, right? So that's really the upshot, that this is a portable archive like the Ark of the Covenant, that the one that Graham Hancock famously wrote about in The Sign and the Seal. I don't know if you read that book, but Graham traced the the fate of the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem all the way to Ethiopia, to Aksum. And so the ark that I'm describing is basically the older version of this, right? So it's not the biblical ark, it's the ancient Egyptian version of a portable archive that contained basically the information that the legend says the creator God used to create the universe. Okay, so this is amazing stuff. Okay, we're talking about the original Genesis code that's contained in this archive under the Sphinx. And in essence, that is what Edgar Cayce said, right? He said that this knowledge comes from Atlantis. Okay, it is prehistoric knowledge. It is special knowledge that was used to construct the Great Pyramid. You know what I'm saying? So it in essence, Edgar Cayce captured the big hallmarks of this story. Okay, and I just basically fill in the real physical details of it in Under the Sphinx.
Wow.
I'm wondering about something too. You know, you said this was placed maybe around 5,000 years ago, but then again, there is other theories here that the pyramids may be older than 5,000. The Sphinx may be older than 5,000. So that could also move that chamber back in time a lot further. So
yeah. Well, I'm not saying that the chamber was established 5,000 years ago. I'm saying that the chamber was opened 5,000 years ago.
Open, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, and I'm saying this because I have a written piece of evidence that says that. It's talking about the opening of an archive, and it's in the book. So that is when I think the archive was originally opened. Okay, and that happens to be just about the time when civilization begins in ancient Egypt, and there is most likely a connection. So what was found inside somehow helped launch the kingdom basically of Egypt. But yes, I agree with you. When the archive was established, that could, of course, that is sometime earlier than that. Regarding the Sphinx, as you know, Robert Schoch, and John Anthony West and Robert Bauval separately through astronomy, they have dated the Great Sphinx to a time something like 10,000 BC. Okay. So the geology, if you look at the enclosure wall, if you look at the erosion on the Sphinx, then the way they put this together is saying this had to have happened during heavy rainfall and runoff over the limestone walls, and so they date this to roughly 10,000 BC. And then the seismic refraction data that they performed on the ditch corroborated those data, and they found basically that the ditch, which is the grounds around the Sphinx, had to have been cut also around that time, about 10,000 BC, not longer than that, not older than that, and not younger than that, but just about the same time, 10,000. So you had a nice match between what the geologists said above the ground and below the ground. Yeah. Now I have to add real quick, there is a way still that the Sphinx or the original lion monument could have been carved later. I don't get into that in the book, but I do have a written inscription that shows a lioness statue, or the lioness Mahid, with a chisel above her neck. And that comes from the first dynasty from around 5,000 years ago. So is it possible that the temples were built and the ditch was carved, and then some sort of yardang was left in the center, not a fully formed statue, but just a rock that kind of looked like a statue, that was established, let's say 10,000 BC, and then much later is when people came, let's say 3,000 BC, 5,000 years ago, and turned that yardang into a lioness statue. Is that possible? And I think there's nothing really about the data that I'm looking at that contradicts that. So that is still a possibility. And then what happened another 500 years after that is that Khafre, most likely Khafre, yet again remodeled the statue and turned the head of the lioness into a sphinx, into a male pharaoh with a Nemes headdress. And so that happened around the Old Kingdom, 2500 BC. So I think you can reconstruct the history of the Sphinx like that, or you can say it was originally lioness all the way back 10,000 BC up until the Old Kingdom when Khafre turned her into a Sphinx. But based on the evidence that I found, again, this is written evidence, I am pretty sure that this happened under Khafre, because the alternative historians, they consider that it could have been Khufu, Jedefre, or some Senefru, another Old Kingdom king. But based on the writing, the written evidence, I actually think it was Khafre. And the reason is because the two names of the Great Sphinx that we know from the New Kingdom, I found the origin of those two names on an architrave, a stone plate from a tomb of a scribe that worked under Khafre. And on that architrave, you can see how the lioness Mehit on one side becomes something on the other side, which turns into the two names of the Sphinx, which is Horachti and Horemachet. I don't know if you know about this, but those are the two names that are written on the dream stela between the forepaws of the Great Sphinx. The dream stela, of course, being from the New Kingdom, right? So the problem has always been we didn't have a name of the Sphinx in the Old Kingdom, which is crazy. You have the greatest statue in the world, and we don't have a name mentioned. And at the same time, when this statue supposedly was made, this is the craziest thing. When I heard about this, I read, I read Origin of the Sphinx. Robert Bauval gave me a copy of the book when I met him in Croatia, and I'm reading the book, and when I got to this point that there's no name, this can't be true. And even the alternative historians have a problem. I thought to myself, how can you say there was a statue before Khafre, but there's no mention of it? There's no stone carving that shows the statue, right? So I thought this was the oddest thing in the world. We don't have a name, we don't have a depiction. And then I realized the problem is that it wasn't a Sphinx, it was a lioness. Yeah. And it had a name. Yeah, and the name was Mehit. And so we published this information, and then, but we still had this problem. What happened after Mehit when the Sphinx was created? What was the name of that statue at the time of its creation? And we had this gap. So what Robert Bauval did, he was able to find the name. He thought it would have been Horachti, and this is based on the pyramid text. So if you walk into the pyramid of Unas, you walk into the antechamber. On the south wall, there is a passage that describes how Unas transfers across the Milky Way to see the sun and transfer over to see Horachti. Okay, so that is where Horachti is mentioned in the pyramid text. So Robert Bauval concluded that has to be the constellation Leo, the counter image of the Sphinx on the ground, which is Horemachet. Okay, so this is how far Robert was able to get this back to the 5th dynasty, which is about 150 years after Khafre. And so what I did, I was able to fill in this gap between Mehit, the statue before Khafre, and Horachti, which is what we read now in the Old Kingdom pyramid text, and that is this architrave, which I show in the book, and how a title of the scribe was converted into those names. It's a fascinating story, and of course the details you just have to look at the book and study it in detail. But how that happened is just incredible. When I saw that, Graham Hancock he wrote the foreword for the book. And he helped me structure the thought, and I emailed this to Graham, and Graham immediately realized that how this is, a very important piece of information, because it helped us finally to bridge this gap that we were never able to bridge before.
Wow.
How far back in history do you date Khafre?
He probably, I'd say 25. He was probably born sometime around 25 BC. Right, so he was Khufu's son, brother of Jedefre, brother of Kawab, brother of Balfra. So there were several sons. They're all buried around the Great Pyramid, except for Jedefre. And so Khafra came to the throne, and he. The way we reconstruct it is he already had the temple complex sitting there. He already had a causeway sitting there. He already had a lioness statue sitting there. And so what he did is he added his pyramid, and then he converted the lioness statue into a sphinx. And why? Because at that time there was a heavy emphasis on Ra suddenly, right? So before Khufu, I don't want to say that there was no Ra, but there was other deities that were more important. But all of a sudden, something happens under Khufu's reign, and Ra becomes extremely important. I do have an explanation for this. I think this was because of a solar eclipse that happened around this time. And so, but for whatever reason, Ra becomes extremely important. And so that is the time when Khafre Kaf Ra, right? He's the first king to incorporate the name of Ra into his own name. And so in order to dedicate his mortuary complex to the sun, he converts the lioness Mehit, which is not really a cemetery guardian. Okay, the lioness is basically a symbol of riding, of the original kingdom, of the original administrative complex that housed the riders of the king that did the accounting. And so she was really more associated with writing, with science, with Thoth, the moon. Okay, not really with the sun. Okay, that the lioness I'm talking. And so here now we have a conversion of the faith to a sun cult. And that is why I think Khafre converted the lioness into a male sun worshipping statue. Okay. So it's really, and my friend Robert Nealon calls this the greatest identity theft in the history of the world. I completely agree with him. You have a female lioness that is more dedicated to the moon, right? I explain that in the book, but for now I'm just going to give you the bottom line. It's a moon goddess, okay? Mehit was associated with the moon, and all of a sudden we turn this into a male sun god statue, okay? And the name Mehit disappears from the records after that, okay? So it is an identity theft, orchestrated by the highest person in the nation, in the land, which is the king. Okay, so yes, and so I feel Rob Nealon and I, we feel very privileged to be able to set the record straight. Okay, to bring back the original statue, which was a female goddess, a female lioness.
Wow.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Then decades ago, I remember reading something while I was still back in Europe, and that was about the face of the Sphinx because it is deformed. And what it said in those writings, I found it in a library somewhere, and I spent a lot of time in those libraries. It said that there was Napoleon Bonaparte that came to Egypt. He was trying to conquer Egypt, and he didn't like the face. So he aimed his cannons at the face of the Sphinx and deformed it. He shot. Have you seen anything like that?
Yes, but it's not correct. No,
it is not?
No, it's not correct. You can actually go back to the Arabic historians. I think Makrizi or Masudi talks about, and this is we're talking about medieval times. So they actually talk about how the Sphinx was defaced by a person by the name of Sufi, if I'm not mistaken. So in any ways, it happened. He's the one that apparently went to the Sphinx and defaced it. Yeah. Really? So this happened long before Napoleon. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
That's.
I think this might be a little bit of propaganda, anti-French propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at how enamored the French are with Egyptian art, I mean, from that very time period, okay, I think it's highly unlikely that they would have defaced the Great Sphinx.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of disinformation out there everywhere.
Yeah, right. But this is easy to check, so you can read up on this. I think it's Makrizi. He recounts all the different Arab historians prior to him talking about the Great Sphinx, and there's a whole compilation of all of these this commentary, and you'll find it in that in those accounts. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I see now we're 1 minute away from our commercial at the bottom of the hour, and when we come back, maybe you could comment a little bit on, because we know the chamber is under the paw of the Sphinx. Is there a hesitancy on the part of the Egyptian government to go in there? Are they afraid that we might find something in there that can upset society? Or I feel there's a hesitancy on this part, but this is something that maybe you have some idea, because I know you dealt with them, and this is something I would love to hear, because there's another rumor too that they did get into this chamber and they did find something that they haven't told people about, and of course, that could be another rumor.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it at your commercial, right? After your commercial break.
Yeah, let's do Mac. Let's run that commercial, and then you let us know when we're done, because I can't see you. Okay, good. Yeah, it seems like
I knew that there was a need because my father had a need. And if my father had a need, then how many other people have a need?
The key to Tyler's coffee is the roasting process. Because Mother Nature makes the coffee bean. We can only work with the processing.
We knew we wanted to go USDA certified organic. So we wanted to be the purest and cleanest coffee in the world. We had to source stuff from Africa, we had to source stuff from Brazil, we had to source stuff from Chile. And we put it through our proprietary Z-roasting processor. So what that really truly means to you is that the coffee doesn't have inflammatory properties in it. I'm dedicated to serving 50 million Americans that suffer from stomach-related modalities, and also the millions of other people that just deserve a great tasting cup of coffee that's healthy and safe.
And for those of you that joined us late, we are talking with Manu Seyfzadeh.
Seyfzadeh.
And
Yeah.
Say that. I know I did it wrong.
No, you are close. It's Seyfzadeh. Seyfzadeh is Seyfzadeh. Yeah.
Seyfzadeh. Okay.
Seyfzadeh. Yeah. Seyfzadeh means
All right.
safe is a sword, and Zadeh means child of. So that's the meaning of
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, we're talking about Egypt and specifically the Sphinx and what's under the paw of the Sphinx. There's some research that actually now is starting to come out that Manu found that explain a lot more about that. So, and before the break, I mentioned that there may be some hesitancy on the Egyptian antiquities, to release some of this information that they just might have. And do you see the same thing, or?
Yeah, I'm not the first one to make that observation. I mean, Robert Bauval did a great job describing this kind of issue in Secret Chamber Revisited, in a lot of detail, by the way. And I have had some interactions with some of the agents that were around the Sphinx in the 1970s. They're still alive. They're in their 80s now. These are elderly gentlemen. And in my email communications with them, I could totally tell that they were not completely at ease to open up about what they had done there. Okay, so for whatever reason, and it may have to do with the fact that they were CIA contractors, and the CIA in those days was interested in remote viewing experiments, and it's just classified even to this day, and they're not allowed to talk about it. It may be as simple as that. It could be, as you say, that the Egyptian government wants to stay ahead of the information curve, and so they hold on to discoveries until the time is right that they can release that information and maximize the amount of tourism, maximize the amount of income. For example, imagine during the pandemic when you don't have a lot of people coming into the country, why would you release, a major discovery at that point of time? Because you won't be able to monetize it, right? So there is a practical aspect. I know some of us might find that objectionable, but it's just a pure scientific environment. There is money involved, obviously, because, about 10-15% of Egypt's GDP comes from tourism. And so, that plays into it, right? But you might ask, well, why does it take 50 years sometimes for this to come out? And some information may just be too dangerous. It may cause unrest in the world, right? Yes, of course. Imagine, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? That had to do with biblical texts, and that in of itself, that was a highly potentially controversial subject matter, right? What if you discovered something written in those scrolls that contradicts the canon? Who knows? There's all these different scenarios possible. And when it comes to a space under the Sphinx, imagine you discover something in that void that cannot be explained with the history that we know. Then we have a big problem. Okay, it's not that science can't handle discoveries like that, but we're talking about science that's mixed here now with mythological stories, with religious stories. People believe strongly in some of these things, like when the world was created, how God created the world, how many gods, some, monotheism, polytheism. There's so many highly explosive issues that that I can understand why some information may be held back. Okay, I look at this scientifically, right? For me, I look at the evidence, and what I found in the book does not make sense in terms of the story of history that we've been told. And so, I look at this as a discovery that I pursue, and I report it in the book. People can look at the evidence. I think it's a pretty solid case that I'm making. Of course, that people are going to criticize it, and they're welcome to do that. That's how science works. You falsify models, and I'm more than happy to be falsified. Okay, it's not a problem whatsoever. I'm okay with that. But you put the evidence out there, and nobody had really looked at this painting from an astronomical perspective. It's not that I'm not the first one who interpreted it. Other people have. Egyptologists have looked at this painting, and they interpreted it within the paradigm of Egyptology. But I think that is not what we're looking at here. When you look at this painting, immediately you realize there's something wrong with the conventional explanation. But to get back to the chamber, I completely understand what you're saying. I think there could be information that we don't have. Also, what I found strange is that from all the drillings, that area in front of the left forepaw is the most promising place. That's where Robert Schoch and Thomas Göbekli actually found a regular structured void, something that looks like a rectangle. It looks man-made. Okay, it looks like there's something inside. And for some reason, from all the drills that have been conducted around the Sphinx, none of them was actually into that particular area, right? So, are they avoiding it on purpose? And
yeah,
I think it's possible. Yes, I think so. It's possible. Yeah, I have a little piece of candy at the end of my book where I address this because Mark Lehner has a high detail map of the area, and he put a signature, tiny signature that probably most people don't know about, into a spot right in front of the left forepaw of the Sphinx. And I think that's where I would drill. If I had a permit to drill, I would drill right where his signature is on that map. Yes. So anyways, so I think it's a great question, and I think there is a seed of truth in it.
Yeah. Wow. Now, what if, let's talk about the pyramids for just a little bit. They could date back 12,000 years or 10,000 BC when maybe they were made. Khufu didn't make that pyramid, but there are 3 of them, actually 5 of them if we count the small ones. And where are the pyramids made maybe at the same time at the Sphinx were, or is there a huge difference in time here?
Well, I know that this is a hot button issue with alternative historians. I understand that. And the top reason why alternative historians, some of them think that the pyramids are older than 5,000 years is because of the technology gap, that there's something that we don't know that was used to build the pyramids, like lifting the stones, right? Like cutting the stones, the granite especially. So I completely understand that. And then there is something about the mathematics, the physics, whatever, the design that goes into the Great Pyramid. It's an incredible structure. Was that knowledge available to the ancient Egyptians? So I get that part, okay? But we have to balance this with the physical evidence that we have. For example, as you know, we recently had a carbon dated the cedar wood that was found inside the northern shaft of the Queen Chamber. And that shaft was sealed. Okay, and it couldn't have been sealed by someone that was there either afterwards or before the wood. I mean, you'd have to say that shaft was built. If you're correct, let's say the pyramid is 10,000 years old, then that shaft couldn't have been part of it. Okay, because the shaft sealed this piece of wood, and the wood can't be older than 3,300 years. Okay, I'm sorry. 33 BC, 5,300 years. Okay, so the carbon dated cedar wood that was sealed inside of the northern shaft of the Queen Chamber dates to between 3,100, I think, and 3,300 BC. Okay, so that's not 10,000 years ago. That's about 5,000. It's, of course, it's older than what Egyptologists are saying. It's not 4,500 years either. It's about 500 years older than that. Okay, so that's the first piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence are the quarry marks inside of the relieving chambers above the king chamber. Okay, now I understand that Scott Crichton and before him Zachariah Stitchin and others have questions if those quarry marks were faked by the team under Howard Weiss, and that was there in the early 19th century to survey the pyramids, and that maybe they faked this inscription inside the relieving chamber. But you have to remember, there's a dozen of these marks that mention the king's name. Okay, different versions of the king's name: Khufu and Khanum Kuf, and what's it called, Maju, which means horse striker. Hero Maju means horse striker. These are all names of Khufu, and we know that from later inscriptions that they were all his names. So it is, even though there is maybe a little bit of a wiggle room for Scott Crichton, for example, that one cartouche may be fake, but it is difficult to imagine that they could all be fake. And regardless, I think he made a good, he approached this scientifically, which is fine. His model makes a testable prediction, which is you can drill a hole into these rafters up there in Campbell's chamber to verify if one of the cartouches, you see a partial cartouche that disappears behind the rock, right? If this is fake, if it was made in modern times, then you would not expect to find paint when you drill a hole through the wall against that rafter, right? There shouldn't be anything because it's a fake. So they did it after the fact. They just painted it where they were able to paint, right? So this is actually, so he's making a testable prediction. And I told this to him, I said, fine. If that's what you think happened, if you think it's fake, then you make a testable prediction. Now, of course, the Egyptian government is not going to let us go up there, drill a hole to confirm this. That's okay. But that's how you do science, okay? So science, you make a model that explains the observations, and then that model has to be tested with predictions. And on that account, I am with Scott Crichton, okay? But if I look at the overall evidence that he presents, and I look at all these inscriptions, and then I still think that and I don't want to make a plausibility argument, but I'm just saying is that it is still way more likely that those inscriptions are real and that they refer to Khufu, so that pyramid actually was at least partially built by Khufu, okay? So what is the compromise here? So I think if you're asking me, what is my personal opinion, okay? My personal opinion is there was something there before, at least the foundation with the mounds, with the hillocks, right? And there was probably something sacred inside of these three hillocks. Okay, probably so. And then after the fact, somebody came, maybe an old kingdom king, and built a structure over it. Is it possible that happened in two phases? Yes, I think so. There are some researchers that propose a smaller pyramid was built first, and then a bigger pyramid was put on top of that. Is that possible? There is a possibility, yes. Jean-Paul Bauval and I, Jean-Paul is Robert's brother, he's an architect. So Jean-Paul and I have been looking at this for over 2 years, and we think that the plans for the Great Pyramid were all made at once, so that this pyramid was not designed originally to be a smaller pyramid and then a larger pyramid later. We think that the plans were all laid down from the very beginning, and we have pretty decent proof of it because of the numbering scheme that was used. It has to do with Fibonacci numbers, it has to do with Horus numbers. It all fits together. It does not appear to us that this was a piecemeal design, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some areas where something was changed after the fact. There is. And there are researchers that have pointed this out, and they're absolutely correct. So, for example, the ascending passage is carved into an already built core structure. Okay, so they built up the core, and then all of a sudden they carved into that core a stretch of the ascending passage. So that means there must have been a change of heart. There was something there that was said, oh, we need to do something a little bit differently. Yes, so that's there. Yes. Also, Jean-Paul and I think that the king chamber was originally supposed to be in the center, and then it was moved to the south by 21 cubits, and it goes exactly by Fibonacci numbers. It's a Fibonacci design, and so we think that that also was a modification that happened, but it happened at the design stage, right? So imagine you have a blueprint for the original design, and then we need to change those things, okay? And then they were changed, and some of those things may have been changed once construction already happened. That's possible, yes, but we do not think that we had one pyramid and then all of a sudden it became another pyramid on the whim. We don't think that's what happened. I know there are some people that think that's what happened, but we think the design does not match that theory. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have read several books about pyramid energy, and
Yes.
it does create an esoteric energy.
Yeah.
We can see that Carillion photography and all kinds of things. Hey, I got this one, that's
Right.
And if you
Yes.
take Carillion photography on a pyramid like this one, you can see a blue spike coming out of the top of it. It's really there.
Right.
And there must be some purpose for this pyramid. I know this is going to delve into your area of maybe opinion, but what do you think the purpose of? Let's talk about the Cheops foremost. Why is it there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'm actually looking at this question right now with the pyramid text. So I have been able to find a connection between the Unas pyramid and the Great Pyramid. There is a connection between those two pyramids, and the texts are revealing some architectural features, I think, of the Great Pyramid and what its function is. Okay, now I completely understand there are people that think that the Great Pyramid is a power plant, that it's some kind of energy harvesting device, or a messenger system that beams out energy into space, or a combination of those things. The ancient Egyptians thought that the pyramids are resurrection machines, okay, and that's what the pyramid texts are really talking about. So it's not just a tomb, it's not just a burial. It is for sure, there was some kind of burial involved, because we know this. I don't know if you notice, Age, but Menkaura's pyramid has an inscription on the granite at the door that calls it a royal burial. I mean, there's no doubt about it that the king was supposed to be buried inside of this pyramid. And unfortunately, and I know, and this is unfortunately a lot of alternative historians that when they hear burial or tomb, they just, they throw up their arms and they walk away. No, it can't be true. But it's kind of a straw man argument, right? Because the thing is, it's not just a burial. That's the key. A pyramid was not just a burial. It was a burial, but not just that. It was actually much more than that. So if you just call it tomb, of course, yes, you're not really catching the true purpose of it. So what do I think? I think it was designed to allow resurrection to occur. And this goes well with what the ancient Egyptians were telling us. However, how do we explain these properties that you're talking about? Okay, well, I think that has to do with the fact that the pyramid is designed with a golden angle, right? So there are some very interesting phenomena that occur when you have the golden section at play. And so what I think is happening is that because the pyramid was designed with the golden angle, or something that's very close to the golden angle, it automatically acquires some physical properties that you otherwise don't have with the other pyramids, okay? And I think that is how you can explain the vibration, the resonance that people feel, the energy concentration. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was a simulation experiment by I think it was a Russian group from St. Petersburg. They simulated the Great Pyramid in an electromagnetic stream, and they found that the energy gets concentrated in certain places inside the pyramid, in the simulated pyramid, okay? And so that is probably, I think, what explains all of these observations, which are completely correct. Like, for example, Christopher Dunn, he's talking about the pyramid harvesting an earth vibration, okay, and turning that vibration, amplifying it in the Grand Gallery, and then making, gas, hydrogen gas being formed in the queen chamber. It rises up to the king chamber, and from there it gets energized, and that energy, chemical harvesting of this energy, then turns the pyramid into a beaming object, okay, that beams a light beam into the sky. This is kind of what Christopher Dunn has proposed. And he's looking at this in a very out of the box way. He's saying this is a machine. Okay, we have to explain this in terms of engineering, not in terms of myth and legends. So what I like about Chris Dunn's theory is that he's out of the box. He thinks like a scientist. He says, how do I make a model that explains the observations? And he has done that. He's one of the very few people that have taken all the observations into account and come up with a model. Now, that does not mean that the model is correct, but that is how scientists operate, okay?
Yeah.
And I am, by training, I'm a scientist. We make models all the time that we put to a test, and most of these models get falsified, okay? That's how you do science. What ends up standing at the end is what survives all of these falsification tests, okay? Unfortunately, alternative historians they feel like stepped on their feet, okay? They have a problem with this approach because they think, oh, you're attacking my theory. But it's not really. This is what scientists do. When we falsify something, we actually know something, okay? This is how science works. So I think so a good scientist is able to create a model that explains all the observations and that can test this model. And that is exactly what Christopher Dunn is doing. He's one of the very few people that have been able to do this. And you know what? If you want to break a paradigm, you have to be able to come up with models that nobody else has thought about before, right? The problem is that most people, when they try to explain things, they will use the knowledge or the dogma of the time. And so they will use a plausibility stick, right? They will say, oh, that's unlikely, that can't be right. But that is not a way to do science, okay? If you want to break a dogma and you have a paradox on your hands, you have to use an explanation that nobody has thought about. And that means you have to be able to go beyond the confines of your dogma and come up with a model that nobody else thought about, no matter how implausible it is, okay? And so Graham Hancock, for example, he's a champion for this very idea. He's telling people, he's basically telling academic scientists, it says, you have given up what you used to be good at, which is to think out of the box and to explain things in ways that the dogma cannot explain. And you've given up on that idea. And so who picked up the slack? Well, it's the alternative historians, the fringe, the heretics, okay, all of us. We have picked up the slack, and now we are the ones who are doing this for the scholars, the university scholars. We're coming up, and they don't like it. They say we're crazy. They call our ideas, lunatics. And you know what? In a way, they are correct, because most of these ideas that we're coming up with are going to be wrong. Okay, that's something that also we have to accept. But among the group of us, the thousands of us, there's going to be one idea that is out of the box that is going to end up breaking a dogma one day, right? And so this is unfortunately the discourse in the world is so partisan now. It's so antagonistic, right? So the two camps are not talking to each other. The academics are shunning the heretics are shunning the academics, and we don't have collaboration, which is what we really need. We need the academics to be able to forget politics, forget grant money, right? Forget being called lunatics, okay? And just relax, okay? Don't worry about your career and talk to us, okay? We don't have a... I mean, see, this is why I'm a physician doing my day job, right? I do models all the time. I have to come up with plausible explanations for what the patient has, but sometimes I have a zebra on my hands. In other words, I have a diagnosis that is completely out there, and if I don't think about it, if I don't keep an open mind, then I'm going to miss the diagnosis. Okay, so this is what I do all the time. For me, this is like second nature.
Yeah.
It
gets complicated when you know that the people that fund these projects, that when people go on a dig, they are a little scared of stepping out of the box. They say, find us some good stuff, but make sure it isn't too controversial, because, you don't want to go too far out of the box, you lose your funding.
I mean, I wouldn't say, I don't want to accuse them of that, but what I would say is that if, let's say, a graduate student comes up with an out-of-the-box explanation, there's a good chance that they will be talked down. They're saying, don't go there, okay, because you're not going to make it in field, okay. And there's plenty of examples of this in history of science, especially in social sciences, in Egyptology. in history, anthropology, yes, because it's so easy, right? It's not really science because you can't really do experiments most of the time. So a lot of it's interpretation. And in Under the Sphinx, I have a part of a chapter devoted to this problem that interpretations in archaeology are a lot of times tainted by politics, by being politically correct, for example. Okay.
Absolutely.
And that's a problem.
There is one more thing that I just itching to ask you, because I know you have spoken on this, and we are getting towards the end. And for the last few minutes, I want you to talk about your books and what is in it and where they can get a hold of you. So stay with us here, folks. But this question is one of my favorite, and you talk about the simulation theory. Is it a chance that we just might, all of us, be living inside a hologram that is created by someone, or maybe us, but someone?
Yes,
So
I have some big news for you. So I am pursuing exactly this question. Right now, I think the pyramid texts in the Pyramid of Unas are virtually simulating the entire Giza Plateau. It is fascinating. Yes, it is like a simulation. You feel like you're inside of a chamber that virtually recreates the entire, we're talking about the three pyramids and the Sphinx. And what I'm looking for, exactly what you're saying, is that little piece of evidence that tells me that this is by design. Okay. In other words, it's not just from within Egyptian culture, but it's actually an esoteric design. It comes from, out there. Because if that's the case, then yes, we might be looking at something really, really interesting. To be honest with you, I am not a fan of simulation. I think that would be depressing if we were in a simulation, but I am nevertheless pursuing the question. Yes, I want to know the truth.
Yeah. What is the truth?
What is the truth? It never ends. It's a journey that never ends, and that's that's why we're here, right? So we all are looking for things. We're searching for our path, and in my case, it has to do with trotting in places where no one else has trotted before.
There you go. And you may have heard of the physicist James Gates also, that says that deep in the equations that explains the fabric of space, we find computer language, and we didn't put it there. You probably heard that. And I want to hear about where they can get hold of you, and speak also a little bit about what they will find in your books.
So Under the Sphinx is available worldwide. Amazon, Hugo House is my publishing house. So it's under Hugo House Publishers. You can get it directly from there, on Barnes and Nobles, on various other outlets. So the book is easy to find. Under the Sphinx, you put it on the internet search and you'll find it. Mm-hmm. Under the Sphinx, it's basically about the search for the real Hall of Records. And that's what I'm taking you on. It's an investigative journey that has to do with evidence from the ancient Egyptians in writing, hieroglyphs. You're going to learn some hieroglyphic, actually, reading this book. You're going to learn about a magical way to speak hieroglyphic, which is called Heka. It's cryptography, basically. So I teach you a little bit about that and how that is used to get to the information. That's how the ancient Egyptians explain things that it was hard for them to explain, and had to do with astronomy. And then I go into the original statue before the Sphinx called Mehit, the lioness. I devote a whole chapter to that. That has to do, of course, with the papers that I had published with Schoch and Bauval before. And then, I have a big surprise at the very end of the book. And I mean, I'm not going to give away the surprise now, but it basically takes you way back. It takes you back to a time before ancient Egypt really begins. And that is why I find the origin of this archive. And so I leave the question open at the end for you to decide if that goes all the way back to Atlantis, or what the idea of Atlantis, meaning a civilization that existed before, that knew the sky in ways that the ancient Egyptians could not possibly have known. And did those people leave that knowledge inside of a chamber under the Sphinx?
There is writing, saying that when the people in Atlantis, they knew that they were going to go down or be destroyed. So some of them left and took the knowledge with them and ended up in Egypt.
Yeah, this is basically what Graham Hancock has been writing about in, in Fingerprints of the God, Magician of the God. He's basically saying is there's too many coincidences, there's too many parallels between different cultures in terms of their afterlife myths, in terms of their megalithic art, their technology, that it had to come from a common source. And of course, that's been Graham's life's work to find out what that source is. Where was the origin of this real Atlantis, right? And so I don't think he's done yet. I think he's probably coming up with at least one other book, and maybe he'll give us. Maybe he found the answer. So maybe you need to have him on the program and ask him yourself. But I know he's coming. He's got a new surprise up his sleeve. So something will come from him.
Snorri, Snorri, we need to get a hold of him.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess we are down towards the end here. So I sure appreciate you being with us. This has been very interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much. Great questions. And, anytime you want to do it again, you know where to find me.
Thank you.
Okay. We will do that.
Okay. Have a good night, guys.
You.
Bye.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. And next week, we will be back. Until then, be good to each other.